So if you were to take my example of Apple seriously and say, it's an extreme example, I will admit. Not every company is outsourcing 90% of what they produce. But I'll give you one more extreme example to illustrate my point. One of the companies I've studied is a company in India. It's the largest mobile operator in India. It's called Bharti Airtel. Bharti, about 8-9 years ago, decided they didn't want to manage their own IT systems, even though they're very central to what a mobile operator does. All the billing, all the monitoring, everything is through there. But they said, we don't want to be in that business. They teamed up with IBM and told IBM, you run it for us. So IBM basically manages, maintains, runs all their IT applications. At the same time, they were getting tired also of managing their network. In India, 70% of the cell towers don't have reliable access to electricity. So you need to put diesel generators over there, you need to maintain them, manage them. They asked 3 of their vendors, Siemens and 2 others, would you manage the network for us? Then about 3 years ago, even though they were now, somebody was managing the network, they owned the network, they were building it. They said, we don't want to be building networks and owning networks. Let's spin that off into a joint venture. So they spun that off into a joint venture with 2 of their competitors. Now they own the joint venture owns the cell towers. So now you say you have a mobile operator, does not own its own network, does not even manage its network, does not even run its own IT systems. You say, what do you do? And they're growing 35% a year, the largest mobile operator in the largest market. Well, I don't know largest, not China, India. But you would say, what do we do? What's core? And I think the point I want to make with this example is companies increasingly today are connected with other companies. These are extreme examples I'm giving you, but there are many other companies you will see who are partnering and collaborating. So I have described this as what I call network resources. But companies, increasingly, their assets are no longer just physical assets, not just intellectual assets, but you see assets in the relationships they have, relational assets or network resources. I think it's important to recognize these as assets because companies have a CFO who manages their physical assets. CFO's job is to see what's in the balance sheet, what are the assets, how do I manage them? We have nobody in most companies to help think about managing relational assets. And for a company like Apple or this Bharti, a big part of the value of the company is in the relationships it has with other companies. And are you doing a good job in proactively managing these assets? Because if you're not, and I think increasingly what you're going to find is that companies that manage these assets effectively perform better. Furthermore, the ones who do it well, there's a certain amount of learning by doing. The more alliances you have, the better you get at it. But I think the alliances you have expose you to other possible deals with your partner's partners. This is a massive network. How do you find each other? Even in the world of internet and all that, information is not perfect. And that's where you see that a lot of deal making is a perpetuating cycle. I form a few alliances. Through my alliances, partners, I learn about other possible deals. I form more alliances. So you see there's a certain amount of momentum building up. Companies that do alliances effectively and strategically early on end up falling into a path where we call it a path-dependent process, where they become more and more effective and they're better and better and they find more and more opportunities than other firms that don't do them very well and don't do them at all. So there's a dark side to alliances. I have been talking about all the positive features and attributes. Oh my God, it's a wonderful thing. Everybody should do it. But whatever limited research we have on failure of alliances shows that by some accounts, depending on how you measure failure, almost half of alliances don't work out. Now, my view, that number is misleading because even if half of all alliances fail, that number is not the same for every company. There are some companies who have a very high alliance failure rate, 90%. And there are other companies who have very low alliance failure rate, maybe 10%. And so, but it's still important to be aware that there is a certain amount of risk in collaboration. So my first response to thinking about exit is companies need to increase the odds of success. They should not be playing to an average, saying, okay, half my alliances are going to fail, so I have to plan for that. I think they have to think about what is it that those few companies that have a 10% failure rate do, and what is it those companies that have a 90% failure rate don't do. What can I learn from that to increase my odds of success? But even if you do that, you still have to plan for exit. In some research I did recently, I looked at companies and their exit strategy and alliances. I was amazed to find how many alliances don't have a proper exit provision. And it doesn't have to do with lack of trust. It could be simply that the strategic objectives of your partner have changed. Their market changed, their business changed, their CEO changed, their capital structure changed, and that may change their goals with the alliance. So you have to build in some flexibility to allow either partner to exit if they want in a very methodical, systematic, and fair way. And so in this research of mine, I've laid out what are the key steps for planning for exit. And one of the findings among them is that you may want to have exit provisions that are not identical for both partners. It depends on the nature of the alliance and who has to commit what. So you have to think very carefully about structuring the alliance. But I think it's somehow viewed as socially inappropriate when you're doing an alliance to talk about divorce or exit. And so a lot of time people just gloss over it. And I think it's a really lost opportunity.